Welcome to the grand finale of our electrifying journey through Tim Urban's What's Our Problem? Here at Read Books Faster, we know that diving into a book's key ideas doesn't have to feel like a snooze fest. That's why we've crafted this dynamic summary of the final chapters, starting with Chapter 7 and taking you on a wild ride all the way to Urban's mind-blowing conclusion. We've packed our video with all the juicy details and thought-provoking insights, ensuring that you'll be on the edge of your seat from start to finish. So, if you're ready to discover how Urban brings it all together in a way that's both informative and entertaining, buckle up and let's dive in. Chapter 7: How to Conquer a Society.
In the grand theater of American public life, a new kind of drama is unfolding. It's a story not of valiant heroes and dastardly villains, but of something more insidious, more corrosive to the very foundations of a free society. This is the story of idea supremacy and its rise to power through the machinations of a movement known as social justice fundamentalism (SJF).
To understand the threat posed by idea supremacy, we must first understand its tactics. Like a skilled martial artist, it advances step by step, each move calculated to exploit the vulnerabilities of a liberal democratic system. The first step on this illiberal staircase is speech control. It begins in the workplace, where the traditional American reverence for free expression is being steadily eroded. Employees now find themselves walking on eggshells, fearful that a stray word or an ill-considered tweet could cost them their livelihoods. The phenomenon of cancellation has become all too familiar, with careers and reputations destroyed over perceived transgressions against the SJF orthodoxy. But it's not just about punishing dissent. Equally troubling is the way SJF concepts are being actively promoted by major institutions. From corporate diversity training to university bias response teams, the language and ideas of SJF are being woven into the fabric of American professional life. Dissent is not just discouraged, but actively suppressed. Step 2 on the illiberal staircase is forced listening. It's no longer enough for SJF to silence opposing views. It must also ensure that its own doctrines are being heard and internalized. This is where mandatory diversity training comes in. Across the country, employees are being subjected to hours of instruction in SJF concepts like privilege, intersectionality, and systemic racism. Refusal to participate is not an option. Indeed, it's often grounds for disciplinary action. Even more concerning is the way these ideas are being presented, not as one perspective among many, but as unassailable truth. Trainees are not invited to critically examine SJF concepts, but rather to accept them as gospel. The result is a kind of forced indoctrination, a requirement that individuals not only tolerate SJF ideas, but actively affirm them. And it's not just in the workplace. The same dynamic is playing out in K-12 schools across America. Children as young as 5 are being taught to view the world through the lens of SJF, to see themselves and others primarily as members of oppressor or oppressed groups. Parents who object to this ideological inculcation often find themselves branded as bigots, their concerns dismissed or even punished. But the endgame of idea supremacy isn't just to control what people hear. It's to control what they say. This is step 3 on the illiberal staircase, forced speaking. It's a world where individuals are pressured to publicly declare their allegiance to SJF ideas, where failure to do so is taken as evidence of moral turpitude. We see this in the rituals of privilege checking and allyship, where individuals are expected to affirm their commitment to SJF principles as a prerequisite for social acceptance. We see it in the demand that people use their voice to support SJF causes, regardless of their personal beliefs or misgivings. Perhaps the most pernicious manifestation of this forced speech is the idea that silence is violence. It's a formulation that equates the failure to actively champion SJF ideas with complicity in oppression. To be silent is to be guilty, to be part of the problem rather than the solution. The result of all this, the speech controls, the forced listening, the compelled speech is a kind of herd mentality, a society in which dissent becomes ever more costly and conformity ever more rewarded. It's a society in which the big brain, the collective intelligence and wisdom of a people begins to atrophy. We can see this dumbing down effect in the way SJF narratives have distorted public understanding on a range of complex issues. Take policing. The SJF account paints a picture of a systemically racist institution where innocent black men are routinely gunned down by bigoted cops. But the reality is far more nuanced. While there are undoubtedly instances of police misconduct, the data simply doesn't support the notion of an epidemic of racially motivated police shootings. Or consider the gender wage gap. SJF orthodoxy holds that women are paid significantly less than men for the same work, a disparity attributed to pervasive sexism. But a closer look at the numbers tells a different story. When factors like job title, experience, and hours worked are taken into account, the wage gap narrows considerably. The reality is not a simple tale of patriarchal oppression, but a complex interplay of social, economic, and cultural forces. The same pattern plays out on issues from LGBTQ rights to affirmative action. The SJF narrative tends towards simplistic binaries oppressor and oppressed, privileged and marginalized. But the truth is almost always more complicated, more ambiguous. By insisting on a single, orthodox interpretation of these issues, idea supremacy stifles the kind of nuanced discourse necessary for real understanding and progress. And the consequences extend beyond mere misunderstanding. Idea supremacy is, in the end, a gateway drug to even more sinister forms of illiberalism. Once you've accepted the premise that certain ideas are beyond dispute, that certain questions are off limits, you've opened the door to a whole host of authoritarian practices. We see this in the way explicit racial discrimination is making a comeback, this time in the name of equity. From government contracting to college admissions, individuals are increasingly being judged not by the content of their character, but by the color of their skin. The SJF rationale is that this kind of discrimination is necessary to correct for historical injustices, but the practical effect is a kind of neo-segregation, a system in which individual merit takes a back seat to crude racial categorization. We see it in the growth of corporate social credit systems, where businesses are pressured to toe the SJF line or face economic retaliation. Step outside the ever-shifting bounds of progressive orthodoxy, and you risk being cut off from basic services like banking and payment processing. It's a form of soft tyranny where ideological conformity is enforced not by the state, but by the cartelized power of woke capital. Perhaps most troublingly, we see idea supremacy's corrosive effect in the way erstwhile defenders of liberal values have been cowed into submission. The American Civil Liberties Union ACLU, once a stalwart champion of free speech and individual rights, has increasingly bent the knee to SJF pieties. Where the organization once defended the rights of neo-Nazis and other marginal groups to express their views, it now shies away from cases that might offend progressive sensibilities. The tragic irony is that, for all its talk of social justice, SJF is ultimately a betrayal of the very communities it claims to serve. By insisting on a rigid, ideological view of the world, it denies marginalized people the nuance, the complexity, the basic human dignity necessary for real empowerment. Take the way SJF reduces people of color to passive victims, stripped of agency and defined entirely by their oppression. Or the way it dismisses dissenting voices within minority communities as internalized racism or false consciousness. In the end, SJF's totalizing narrative leaves no room for individual experiences, no space for people to define their own identities and chart their own paths. And what of the SJF true believers, those who have fully bought into the ideology? For them, idea supremacy offers not liberation, but a kind of mental prison. To live in the world of SJF is to inhabit a realm of constant anxiety, where every interaction is fraught with the potential for offense, where the specter of privilege lurks around every corner. It's a world devoid of grace, where even the most well-intentioned misstep can brand one as an enemy of progress. This isn't to say that the issues SGF purports to address aren't real or urgent. Racism, sexism, homophobia, these are evils that any decent society must confront. But the SJF approach, with its thought policing and forced confessions, is a cure worse than the disease. It's a recipe not for social healing, but for deepening division and resentment. And then there's the final, bitter irony. For all its progressive pretensions, idea supremacy has proven to be an invaluable gift to the very reactionary forces it claims to oppose. Every canceled speaker, every Twitter mob, every struggle session becomes grist for the right-wing outrage machine. Demagogues and charlatans can point to the excesses of SJF and say, "See, this is what the left really thinks. This is what they want to do to you." In this way, idea supremacy breeds a kind of backlash, a sense among many ordinary people that progressive ideas are a threat to their way of life. It's a dynamic that's all too easily exploited by cynical operators who use the specter of wokeness gone wild to advance their own authoritarian agendas. The end result is a kind of doom loop, a self-perpetuating cycle of ideological escalation. The more the SGF left attacks liberal norms in the name of social justice, the more the illiberal right feels emboldened to do the same. And with each turn of the wheel, the space for reasoned debate, for good faith disagreement, grows ever smaller. It's a dynamic that threatens to hollow out the very foundations of a free society. Because idea supremacy, whether it comes from the left or the right, is ultimately anathema to the liberal values of open inquiry, individual autonomy, and the rule of law. It's a recipe for a world in which might makes right, where truth is subordinated to power, and where the only refuge lies in conformity to the prevailing orthodoxy. Confronting this threat will require more than just a reassertion of classical liberal principles, important as that is. It will require a fundamental rethinking of what it means to be a progressive in the 21st century. It will require the left to rediscover its commitment to free speech, to open debate, to the notion that no idea is beyond scrutiny or critique. Most of all, it will require a renewed sense of humility, a recognition that no single ideology or movement has a monopoly on truth. That real progress comes not from enforced consensus, but from the clash of competing ideas. That the path to a more just society lies not in the suppression of dissent, but in the hard work of persuasion and compromise. This is the challenge that now confronts us: to resist the siren song of idea supremacy, to defend the values of a free and open society against those who would seek to undermine them. It won't be easy. The temptations of dogmatism are strong, and the pressures to conform are immense. But the alternative, a world in which the only choices are submission or ostracization, is too grim to contemplate. In the end, the fight against idea supremacy is nothing less than the fight for the soul of our democracy. It's a fight that will require courage, conviction, and a willingness to speak uncomfortable truths. But it's a fight that we cannot afford to lose. For in a world where ideas are not free, no one is truly free, and that is an impoverishment none of us should be willing to accept. Changing course. In the grand sweep of human history, the story of our species is one of constant adaptation. From the savannas of Africa to the skyscrapers of modernity, we have proven ourselves to be a remarkably resilient and inventive creature, able to thrive in an astonishing range of environments. But for all our flexibility, there remains a fundamental tension at the heart of the human condition, a mismatch between our ancient instincts and the demands of the modern world. This is the central problem of our time. Human nature, forged in the crucible of prehistoric scarcity and danger, is ill-suited to the challenges of an era of abundance and exponential change. The same impulses that once kept us safe, the tendency to form tight-knit tribes, to fear outsiders, to respond to threats with aggression, now threaten to tear us apart. In a world of nuclear weapons and global pandemics, the consequences of our unchecked primitive drives could be catastrophic. But there is hope. For just as we have reshaped our physical environment to suit our needs, so too have we constructed systems of thought and governance to channel our baser instincts toward higher ends. Chief among these is the tradition of liberal democracy, an artificial habitat designed to cultivate the best of human nature while constraining the worst. At its core, liberal democracy is a machine for managing disagreement. It recognizes that in a diverse society, conflict is inevitable, that reasonable people can and will differ on fundamental questions of value and belief. But rather than allowing these differences to devolve into violence or oppression, liberalism seeks to transmute them into a source of strength. Through the alchemy of open debate, free inquiry, and the rule of law, it aims to forge a whole greater than the sum of its parts. This system, for all its flaws, has proven remarkably successful. Over the past 2 centuries, liberal democracies have generated unprecedented levels of peace, prosperity, and individual freedom. They have expanded the circle of moral concern to encompass ever wider swaths of humanity, breaking down barriers of race, gender, and creed that once seemed insurmountable. But today, this hard-won progress is under threat. The exponential growth of technology has unleashed forces that are straining the very foundations of liberal society. Social media platforms, once hailed as a boon to democratic discourse, have become engines of polarization and misinformation. Economic dislocation, driven by globalization and automation, has fueled a populist backlash against elites and institutions. Climate change, mass migration, and the specter of AI-driven unemployment loom on the horizon, portending an era of unprecedented disruption. In the face of these challenges, the siren song of tribalism grows ever more seductive. Demagogues and extremists, wielding the weapons of idea supremacy, promise a return to a mythical past of certainty and order. Across the political spectrum, people retreat into echo chambers of their own making, losing the capacity for empathy and good faith disagreement. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. So what is to be done? How can we, as individuals and as a society, navigate this treacherous landscape? The answer, I believe, lies in a renewed commitment to the core values of liberal democracy and a recognition that upholding those values begins with the choices we make in our own lives. The first step is awareness. We must recognize that none of us are immune to the cognitive biases and blind spots that distort our perception of reality. We are all prone to motivated reasoning, to seeking out information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs and dismissing that which challenges them. We are all susceptible to the lure of the mob, the rush of self-righteousness that comes from joining a cause or attacking a common enemy. Cultivating awareness means embracing humility, recognizing the limits of our own knowledge, and the possibility that we might be wrong. It means actively seeking out perspectives that differ from our own, not to demolish them, but to understand them. It means learning to spot the patterns of low-rung thinking in ourselves and in others, the knee-jerk reactivity, the black and white moralizing, the demonization of opponents. But awareness alone is not enough. The second step is courage. In an age of idea supremacy, true moral courage means being willing to stand up for liberal values, even when it comes at a personal cost. It means refusing to mouth pieties we don't believe, even if those around us are doing so. It means being willing to disagree with our own tribe, to break ranks with ideological allies when conscience demands it. This isn't easy. The pressure to conform, to go along to get along, can be immense, and the consequences of dissent, social ostracization, professional ruin, even physical danger are often all too real. But as the great civil rights leader Bayard Rustin once said, we need, in every community, a group of angelic troublemakers. These are the people who have the guts to speak truth to power, to stand up for the unpopular or the marginalized, to insist on the value of open debate and free inquiry. They are the ones who, in the words of Robert F. Kennedy, dream of things that never were and ask why not. Without them, the flame of liberal democracy will surely flicker and die. But courage, like awareness, is a muscle that must be exercised. It starts with small choices in the context of our daily lives. It means being willing to voice our true thoughts, first in private conversations with trusted friends, and then, gradually, in more public settings. It means being willing to listen, really listen, to those we disagree with, not to convince them, but to understand them as fellow human beings. Over time, these small acts of bravery can coalesce into something larger, a cultural shift towards greater openness, greater resilience in the face of challenge and change. They can help to create an environment where good faith debate is welcomed, where heterodox ideas can be expressed without fear of reprisal. In short, they can help to build a society that lives up to the highest ideals of the liberal democratic tradition. Will this be enough to save us from the centrifugal forces currently tearing at the fabric of liberal society? There are no guarantees. The challenges we face are immense, and the forces arrayed against us are formidable. It is all too easy to give in to despair, to conclude that the game is lost, and that the only viable option is to retreat into our respective corners and prepare for the coming unraveling. But I choose to believe that another future is possible. I choose to believe that the story of human progress is not yet over, that for all our flaws and fallibilities, we possess a remarkable capacity for reason, for empathy, for that most precious and fragile of commodities, hope. This belief is not naive optimism. It is grounded in the hard-won lessons of history, in the knowledge that time and again, when the chips were down, human beings have found within themselves the wisdom and the fortitude to bend the arc of the moral universe a little closer to justice. It is a belief that our better angels can and will prevail, if only we have the courage to summon them. This, then, is the task that lies before us: to resist the pull of fatalism and despair, to hold fast to the values that have made progress possible, and to do the hard work of building a society that reflects our highest aspirations. It will not be easy, and success is far from guaranteed. But as the old saying goes, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice if we have the strength to bend it. In the end, the story of liberal democracy is the story of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. It is the story of individuals who, faced with the choice between the easy comforts of conformity and the hard road of moral courage, choose the latter. It is the story of communities that, in the face of division and strife, find ways to come together and forge a common purpose. Most of all, it is the story of a never-ending struggle, the struggle to create a society in which every human being, regardless of race or creed or station, is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. This struggle has been the driving force behind every great social movement in modern history, from the abolition of slavery to the fight for women's suffrage to the civil rights revolutions of the 1960s. Today, that struggle continues. The specific challenges may be new, but the underlying principles are timeless. And though the forces of illiberalism and idea supremacy may seem ascendant in the moment, history tells us that they will not have the final word. For the human spirit is indomitable, and the thirst for freedom is universal. As long as there are those willing to stand up for these ideals, as long as there are angelic troublemakers ready to dream of things that never were and ask why not, the flame of liberal democracy will never be extinguished. This, ultimately, is the bright sky that lies beyond the gathering clouds of our current moment. It is the promise of a society that, for all its imperfections, strives to live up to the noble ideals enshrined in its founding documents, a society in which everyone, no matter their background or beliefs, has an equal chance to pursue their own version of the good life. Realizing that promise will require more than just hope. It will require hard work, sacrifice, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our world. But if we can summon the courage to face these challenges head on, if we can learn to see beyond the narrow confines of tribe and ideology and embrace our common humanity, then I believe there is no limit to what we can achieve. The road ahead will be long and the obstacles formidable. But as we embark on this journey, let us draw strength from the words of the great American poet Walt Whitman. The strongest and sweetest songs yet remain to be sung. May we have the wisdom to listen for those songs and the courage to sing them. Wow, what a journey we've been on. Tim Urban's What's Our Problem is a masterclass in understanding the forces that shape our world and the role we can play in creating a better future. We hope our summary has done justice to Urban's groundbreaking work and left you with a renewed sense of purpose and possibility. Until next time, keep reading and keep thinking big.